"If you leave this house, you would do me a favor," Richard said calmly, without raising his voice, speaking with the detachment of someone asking to take out the trash. I held a cup of coffee in my hands. It was still steaming. I had poured it just a couple of minutes ago. My fingers trembled slightly, not from the heat, but from the chill that ran through my chest at that moment. I said nothing, only looked at him and understood. I realized there was nothing left of the boy I had raised with so much effort, the one who cried at night and clung to my skirt, the one who told me, "Mom, never die." Now he looked at me as if I were in the way, like an old piece of furniture, or, worse, as if I had never been part of his life. He turned around and went to the room where Ivy, his wife, waited with that crooked smile she always wore when I was in pain. I stayed alone in the kitchen at Melanie's house, the home that had once been mine, clenching my teeth, trying not to drop a tear, and I asked myself one question: how did we get here? Everything started many years ago. My name is Celia Garcia, and my life has not been easy. I married young to Mark, a hard-working and kind man, but he left too soon. An accident at the factory took him away. He left me with a small son and a house that at that time was all we had. I was a seamstress, doing whatever I could, harvesting crops, cleaning houses, selling tamales on the street, all for Richard, my only son. He was my world. The world was my driving force, my reason to keep going when everything around me was falling apart. I never remarried, not because there were no chances, but because I believed no man should take the place of his father, and all my energy had to be for him. That is exactly what I did. I dressed him with my own hands, fed him with my hard work, and when he got sick, I sold whatever little I had to buy his medicine. There were harsh times, extremely tough. I remember one Christmas when we only had one loaf of bread and a single soda to share between the two of us. But he was happy, and I was even happier just seeing him smile. I thought all that love would come back one day. How naive I was. Richard grew up. He became a man, not brilliant, but clever. He found jobs here and there, and in his early 30s, he met Ivy. From the very beginning, something about her unsettled me. It was not just the way she looked at me over her shoulder. It was how she spoke to Richard as if he were a foolish child needing control, as if I were a threat to her authority. Within a few months, they were living with me. I had no issue with that. After all, it was his home, too. I had not raised him to be selfish or ungenerous. I opened the door to them, gave them the master bedroom, cooked for both of them, washed their clothes, even cleaned up after their gatherings. But little by little, something started to change. Richard stopped talking to me the way he used to. He answered with one-word responses showing annoyance. Ivy, on her part, began to... She settled in as if she were the queen of a house that was not hers. Ivy reorganized the kitchen without asking me for permission. She criticized the way I cleaned. Dirty clothes were left all over the house, and when I complained, Richard would ask me to be patient. "It is her nature, Mom. Do not take it personally." I would nod silently, but inside I began to feel pain. One day I came back from the market and found my bathroom belongings packed in a box. Towels, creams, even my medications were all there. "Ivy wants more space," said Richard without looking me in the eyes. "You can store your things in the utility room." That room at the back of the patio was where I had kept old tools. It was dark, damp, but I did not protest. I swallowed my pride like swallowing glass. "Of course," I replied. The next day, I started sleeping there. It took me weeks to get used to the smell of confinement. Months passed. They spoke to me less and less, saw me less frequently. Sometimes they would bring food and not even offer it to me. I cooked for myself, washed my own clothes. When I wanted to watch television, Ivy said the volume bothered her. I felt like an unwanted guest in the home I had built with my husband, yet I kept enduring. Why? Because I still clung to the idea that deep down, Richard was my son, and that a son does not forget. Until one day came. I was sweeping the living room when I heard Ivy talking on the phone with a friend in the kitchen. Yes, can you believe it? She still lives with us. The old woman does not realize she is a nuisance. I do not know how to make her leave once and for all. I was frozen in place. I remained silent and then heard Richard's footsteps as he came in. "Is she still here?" she asked. "Do something." And he, with a calm voice, as if it were nothing, said something that shattered me. If she leaves, she would be doing us a favor. I could not move. I did not know whether to cry, scream, or simply vanish. They did not see me. They finished talking and locked themselves in their room. I went up to my space, that small, dark room at the back of the yard. I closed the door and sat on the bed. The tears came quietly, not because of what was said, but for everything it represented. There was no longer any doubt I was no longer welcome. Then I decided I would leave, but not the way they wanted. I would leave as I deserved. There were still steps in such a plan ahead. Hey, Justice Puna was no longer the fragile woman she once was. I did not leave that night. Not yet. I lay in that damp little room with my head full of thoughts and my chest tight, as if someone had stabbed me. I barely slept. I got up before dawn. I made coffee as always, but this time only for myself. I sat in the yard under the dry tree Mark had planted decades ago and watched the sky as day broke. I thought about my life, who I was, and who I became. It was then I decided that before I left, I would remember who I was, who I had been before being ignored, humiliated, and discarded by my own son. When Mark passed away, Richard was only 7 years old. He was a gentle, quiet child who struggled to comprehend death. For weeks, he kept asking when his father would come back. At night, he would cry quietly and crawl into my bed, trembling. I would weep silently when he wasn't looking. A few months later, the savings ran out. I sold the jewelry my mother had left me and started washing other people's laundry. Sometimes I would leave the house with my face covered, feeling ashamed because some neighbors recognized me. But what embarrassed me the most was seeing my son go hungry. I remember one day we came home with no money at all. There was nothing to eat. Richard looked at me and said, "It doesn't matter, Mom. I'm not hungry." But I knew he was. I could hear his stomach growling. I went out onto the street, walked 6 blocks, and asked Mrs. Terray at the store if I could buy food on credit. She gave me a loaf of bread, an egg, and half a liter of milk. That night, Richard ate while I did not. That was how it went for years. I lived for him. When he finished high school, he wanted to work to help me. I told him no, to focus on studying because I would take care of everything. I found a job cleaning offices in the early mornings and got only 4 hours of sleep each night. My fingers swelled from so much washing and ironing, but I managed to pay for his secondary education. Even when I was diagnosed with a spinal problem and the doctor advised rest, I kept working. He was my hope, my investment, my reason to keep going. When he graduated, he said, "Mom, I will pay you back everything. You will see." I believed him. How could I not? The first strike came when he turned 29. He was already working as an administrative assistant in a small company. He had his own money, although he still lived with me. I never demanded anything from him. He gave me enough for basic expenses, but he was rarely at home. One day, he came home with a woman. "Mom, this is Ivy," he said. Her skin was pale, her eyes cold, and she wore expensive clothes. She shook my hand without making eye contact. "And you cook every day, Celia," he said, as if asking if I still use firewood to keep warm. "How old-fashioned." Richard laughed. "My mom is from another time." It hurt me, but I smiled. I thought it was just a joke. It was not. A few months later, Ivy was staying every weekend. She took my place at the table. She served herself before I could. She used my blankets. She even complained about the smell of my cooking. "You always use so much oil," she said, wrinkling her nose. Richard barely corrected her. He was becoming a different man. One day they had a loud argument in the hallway. Ivy shouted she did not want to keep coming to such a small, ugly house. She deserved something better. That same week, Richard told me, "I want the three of us to live together here, but we will need to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe you could use the back room. That way she would feel more comfortable." My blood ran cold. "You want me to leave my room?" "It's just a space, Mom. You have always said family is what matters, right?" I foolishly agreed. Ivy settled in like a queen. She redecorated, ordered new paint, brought in fresh furniture. The old pieces, my things, were sent out to the backyard. She replaced the pictures, hid the photo of Mark, and packed away the albums from when Richard was a child. Every day I wondered when exactly I lost my place in all this. Sundays, once reserved for family time, turned into days of isolation for me. They went out to restaurants and took strolls. Sometimes they came back late, laughing with shopping bags. I found out about their plans through social media. They never invited me. When guests came, Ivy would say, "Celia, could you please stay inside? Important people are coming and you tend to talk too much." As if I was something to be ashamed of. Richard just nodded as if it was normal, as if it didn't hurt him. One night was especially tough. I had prepared a special stew. It was Mark's anniversary. I thought maybe just for this night we could eat together. I waited for them with the table set, but they arrived late. She was drunk. He had glassy eyes. "What is this?" Ivy asked. "Home-cooked food," I said. Again the same. "Today is your dad's anniversary," I added. Richard looked at me coldly. "Mom, it's been many years. You need to move on." They locked themselves in their room without touching a single plate. That night, I ate alone with Mark in my memory, and my heart shattered. Every small insult was a wound. Every humiliation left a scar. Yet I remained silent. I kept hoping that one day my son... He was supposed to wake up, yet he did not. He disappeared, moving farther and farther away. He stopped asking for advice, stopped sharing his stories, barely greeted me, almost like a detached tenant. Ivy, on the other hand, deliberately provoked me. Sometimes she left the stove on, and when I turned it off, she called me paranoid or blamed me for things I had not done. Like that time she lost an earring and accused me of hiding it. "Does it bother you that I have something nice, Celia Garcia?" "I have no clue what you are talking about." Sure, it must have been the dog." "Oh, right, you do not have a dog or a life." Richard did not say a word. That night I cried silently, covering my mouth to keep quiet. It was then I realized they were not going to change, and I could not keep waiting. So I began to think, not about leaving empty-handed, but about leaving with dignity. For that, I needed help. Abandonment does not happen overnight. It is a slow drip. One word here, a slight disdain there, a gesture, a mocking laugh behind your back. And before you know it, you no longer exist. You have been erased. You no longer matter. That was how it was with me after that night, when they did not touch the food I made for Mark's anniversary. Something inside me broke. It was not anger, it was something worse, a cold indifference toward them. I got up, did the minimum, stopped trying to please, stopped decorating, stopped cooking for 3. I became invisible, and it was in that silence that they felt more powerful. One afternoon, Ivy returned furious, threw the bag on the floor, and said, "I am tired of living like this. This house is a mess. I cannot focus. I cannot breathe here." "What happened now?" asked Richard, exhausted. "Your mother. Her things are everywhere, and that back room smells damp. Why do we keep allowing this?" I overheard her from the kitchen. "What do you want me to do?" he muttered. I want you to send her somewhere, to a nursing home, whatever it takes. I'm not going to keep sharing a roof with that lady. That lady does not even respect my name. After everything I did, I expected an answer, a gesture, at least something like, "Do not go too far." But there was nothing, only silence. The next day, Richard approached me while I was hanging up the laundry. "Mom, I have been thinking. Maybe you could spend a few days with Aunt Elena in Veracruz. It would be a change of scenery. You hardly ever leave here." I slowly looked up. "Did that idea come from you or your wife?" He did not answer. "Do you want me to leave, Richard? Please do not put it like that." "Then how? Tell me." "Of course, Mom. Ivy is stressed. And what about you? What about me?" He lowered his gaze and rubbed his neck. "You no longer fit here." I remained silent. It hurt, but I was not going to beg. I just nodded and continued folding the clothes. That night, I could not sleep. I sat down with an old notebook, the one I used to write down the shopping list, and began to write. Not a plan, but a list of things that still belonged to me. The land in the village where my sister used to live. A couple of old valuables that had been hidden inside an old boot. A forgotten account with little in it. But there was something. The deed to the house. Registered in my name. Because Mark had left it to me. They did not know. They assumed that living here forever meant it all belonged to them. But the document said otherwise, and that was the spark. I thought, what if I leave? Not defeated, but rather leaving behind a lesson they would never forget. Days passed. I pretended everything was normal. Richard and Ivy started planning a vacation to Cancun. I found out by chance when I saw some emails on the computer. They did not say a word to me, yet I treated them politely, not for their sake, but for my own. I knew my departure had to be clean, graceful, and final, but first things had to get even darker. One morning, Ivy entered my room without knocking. She was holding a handkerchief. "This belongs to you." "No, it was in my bag. Did you take it?" "Of course not." "You have no reason to lie and no reason to make things up." She looked at me with contempt. "You are a burden, Celia, and soon your time here will run out." She left slamming the door. I trembled, not from fear, but from suppressed rage. A few days later, they came with a tall man carrying a briefcase. "He is an appraiser," Ivy said, smiling like a viper. "We want to know the estimated value of the house in case, changes need to be made." Changes, sure. Remodel, sell, whatever. I looked at them. I waited for him to say something. Richard just shrugged his shoulders. "Just in case, Mom." I went to my room, locked the door, and that night I cried for the last time in that house. The following day I visited the notary. I obtained a certified copy of the deed. Indeed, everything was in order. I was the sole owner, and right there I requested something else, an inspection to prepare the formal sale of the property. I pretended it was for inheritance matters, but deep down I was already closing that chapter. Meanwhile, Ivy started giving me ridiculous tasks. "Can you clean the terrace again? It looks dusty." Another time, "Rice again." "Celia, please change the menu." "Could you stop playing the radio so loudly? It distracts me." Every day there was a complaint. Every day a way to show me I was no longer welcome. And Richard grew more distant. He no longer called me Mom, only Celia. That was the deepest wound. One afternoon, while sweeping the yard, I overheard Ivy on the phone. "No, obviously she doesn't know anything. She thinks we are going to throw her a little party or something. She has no idea. When we come back from the trip, everything will be ready." Pause. "Yes, the appraiser said we can ask for a lot. And if we sign quickly, imagine, we sell, buy something under our names, and leave her out. After all, she has nothing in her name." Or does she? I laughed quietly, bitterly. They knew nothing. That night I wrote a long, painful, cold letter. I kept it in the drawer. It was not the right time yet. I waited patiently. On the day of their trip, I helped them pack. I wished them a safe journey and smiled at them. Ivy hugged me with a hint of condescension. "Take care," she said. "Yes, try not to cause any trouble." Richard kissed my forehead gently as if I were a forgotten doll. When the taxi pulled away, I watched them through the window, realizing it was the moment. I went to the bank and withdrew the small amount left in the joint account he never bothered to check. Then I headed to the pawn shop and sold whatever valuable items remained, a medal, a watch, some old figurines. I called the notary to confirm the sale. In less than a week, the house was already encumbered. Only one signature was missing, mine, and I gave it the last night I slept there. I felt peace, not sadness or fear, but peace because I knew I was finally choosing myself. Sometimes you need to face the abyss to remember that you are able to fly. After signing the sale documents, I still had a few days before officially handing over the property. The money was going to a new account opened in my name, secure and clean, mine alone. I had everything planned, even the exact day when they would return from Cancun. I knew they suspected nothing. I was sure by the time they arrived I would be far away. Yet I did not know where I was going. I did not have a place or plans, only a vivid idea, not to beg for affection ever again. And it was right then, as I packed my last belongings, when someone knocked at the door. A tall man wearing a hat, his face weathered by the sun. I recognized him as soon as I saw him. It was Celia Garcia. I nodded. "My name is Dario, a friend of your sister Elena." My heart skipped a beat. Elena had passed away 5 years ago. She had lived on the land we owned in the village of Santa Lucia, a few hours from here. "I am sorry," I said right away. "I am not coming because of that. I am coming because I found some of your things, some letters and papers. Your sister asked me to keep them. I thought they no longer mattered, but for some reason I dreamed about you last night, and something told me I had to come." He handed me a yellowed envelope. I took it. Inside were old photographs, a letter written by Elena in blue ink, and a sketch of the land. There was also a note saying, "If Celia ever needs to start over, remind her she has roots here." I invited Dario inside. We made coffee. He told me that he had been Elena's neighbor and confidant for many years, that he now lived alone, helped in a cooperative of rural women, and often fondly remembered stories about my sister. "And the land?" I asked. "It is still there, neglected but standing. The walls are damaged, but its soul remains." "Do you think I could go?" "You should." That night I could not sleep. I read Elena's letter at least 5 times. She spoke to me as if she knew everything I had been through, as if she had guessed that one day I too would be pushed to the edge. And there, in one line, I read something that broke me. "You were always the strong one, Celia. I left first because I knew you would rise when no one else believed in you." I called Richard at dawn. I asked him if the land had electricity. He told me it did not, but he could assist me in setting up the essentials. I inquired about transportation to the place. He offered to give me a ride. "You do not have to do this," I said. He replied, "I am not doing it out of obligation. I am doing it because I am also searching for something that brings meaning to my days." That afternoon, while Ivy was sending me messages about the weather in Cancun and smiling pictures with Richard on the beach, I was preparing for my final departure. I paid the last bill for the house, handed the keys over to the notary, and packed only the bare necessities. The rest, such as furniture and decorations, which they valued so much for their appearance, I left behind. I did not want to keep anything that carried their scent. On the way to the village, Richard and I hardly spoke, but when we crossed the old bridge, he looked at me and said, "It is never too late to rebuild yourself." I smiled and answered, "I am learning that now." Upon arriving in Santa Lucia, I sensed something I had not experienced in a long while, true silence. Not the silence of neglect, but the silence that comes with peace. The land was exactly as he had described, neglected, overgrown with weeds, and with faded walls. Yet there was no ruin there, only history. I walked in and knew that this would be my fresh start. Weeks passed. Richard helped me clean up, set up a small generator, and find an old stove. The village cooperative welcomed me warmly. They were strong women, widows, deserted wives, single mothers, fighters. And there I realized that I was not alone. One of them, Carmen, offered me help with an embroidery workshop. We have orders from outside, paid work. It is not much, but together we manage to live. I agreed. My hands, which once shook from fear, now trembled with creativity. One day Carmen asked me, "Do your children look for you?" I shook my head. One of them wished me far away, so I granted that. She looked at me for a long time and nodded silently. Weeks passed. The money from the sales allowed me to fix the land little by little. I painted the walls, planted herbs, bought a radio, and even adopted a stray cat that appeared one afternoon without warning. I named him Mark, after my husband. One Sunday, while sweeping the yard, I saw Dario arrive holding an envelope. "This came addressed to you at the old address." I opened it. It was a letter from Richard. His words trembled between the lines. "We returned from Cancun, and the house was empty. Ivy thought it was a joke. I did too, but then I read your letter. I cannot believe you sold everything. Why did you do that, Mom?" I laughed, a short, empty laugh, and then I continued, "I do not know where you are. I do not know if you want me to look for you, but if you ever want to talk, I will be here." I did not reply. There was nothing left to say. Dario looked at me. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I answered. "For the first time in years, everything is okay." That night, I sat on the porch with Mark the cat on my lap and looked at the starry sky. I thought about my sister, about what she would have said seeing me there. I thought about every time I cried in silence, each humiliation, every cold meal, and every unspoken word. I realized that every step I took to reach where I am now was worth it. Yet the past does not easily stay buried, and in the next chapter, I would discover they had no intention of giving up so soon. Richard appeared sooner than I expected. Exactly 3 weeks after receiving his letter, he came. He did not announce his arrival or ask for permission. He simply parked a brand new black car at the driveway and stepped out with the look of a wounded child, combined with the arrogance of a man used to getting what he wants. I was at the back of the house watering the plants that I had managed to secure thanks to Carmen when I heard the car door slam. I immediately sensed that something was wrong. It was not the surprise that unsettled me, but the speed of his arrival and the expression on his face. He was not there just to talk. "What is this, Mom? Why are you here? How could you leave us like this?" I wiped my hands on the apron and looked at him. There was something in his voice that reminded me of the child I had been slowly letting go of, but there was also poison, the same venom he had learned from Ivy, from her ego and comfort. I did not answer right away. I went inside, poured some water, and offered it to him. He refused. "We have some of your things," he said. "Documents, jewelry, memories. You left without looking back, Dad. Mark is dead." I interrupted. "You know that. If you came to talk about objects, you have come to the wrong place. You sold the house. Our home. It was my house, my sanctuary. You said it yourself. If I left, I would be doing you a favor." His eyes clouded over. He lowered his voice and paced around the small living room as if searching for arguments among the walls until he stopped in front of me, holding something in his hand. "Ivy wants us to resolve this calmly, but if you refuse, we have other ways." He handed me a paper. It was a letterhead from a law office. I sat down before reading it. It was a subtle threat. If I did not return the family property, they would start legal proceedings for alienation without the consent of the rightful heirs. I laughed not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. "You have no right," I told him. "I am your son. I have the right to protect what belongs to me. You have nothing coming to you, not while I am alive. And even after, if I had a choice, I would not leave you a rusty nail." "You cannot do this," he shouted, pounding the table with his fist. I already did. Silence thickened the air. My heart raced, but my voice remained steady. It was the first time I spoke to him like that. The first time I did not beg for love or justify myself. That freedom felt like a slow fire spreading through my chest. Richard took the document, crumpled it, and put it back in his folder. Before leaving, he said something that pierced me deeply. "You do not know who you are messing with. Ivy will not let this go easily. I swear it." And he left. That night was far from peaceful. I slept not out of fear, but due to the indignation boiling beneath my skin. After everything I had done for him, he now came to claim what never belonged to him. I had toiled my entire life, giving up dreams, friendships, and my own self. I provided them with food, education, shelter, and comfort. I sacrificed my best years, and this was how they repaid me. The next day, I went to the small town center to find Dario. I told him everything. He listened silently with a clenched jaw. "We can talk to a municipal lawyer," he said. "I know you have nothing illegal, but it is worth being protected." I agreed. The lawyer was young and attentive. He reviewed the sale documents and my papers and assured me everything was in order. The only thing they could try was to slander me or apply emotional pressure. "They will try," he said, "but you are not alone." He offered to represent me if needed at no cost since his mother had experienced something similar. I left the office calmer yet with a knot in my stomach. I knew that Ivy was more dangerous when silent than during direct confrontation, and I was not mistaken. 2 days later, she showed up in Minosimiotoso, Santa Lucia. She did not come to my house, but went to the market where she spoke to some women from the cooperative. She said I was ill, that I had memory gaps, and was probably unwell. She hinted that maybe I needed medical attention and suggested my choice to move to such a remote place was a sign of instability. It was Carmen who told me, outraged. And you know what else? She said they were planning a legal review. They wanted to have you declared incapable. I could not believe it. Now they aim to label me mentally incompetent, all in an attempt to take back what was no longer theirs. At that moment, I realized this was not merely a fight for money or possessions. It was a struggle for control. They could not stand that I had reclaimed my freedom. They could not accept that I had chosen to live without them, because through my actions, I was telling them I no longer needed them. I returned to the lawyer. We prepared a legal response. I requested a voluntary medical evaluation with a trusted specialist. I underwent tests, interviews, and assessments. The outcome was clear. I was fully capable, mentally, emotionally, physically. Yet they did not stop. They sent letters, called my acquaintances, attempted to pressure a social worker's visit, but all crumbled in the face of the evidence. I was well, alone, but determined. One night, Mark found me crying beside the stove. It was not weakness, it was exhaustion. "Is this effort worth it?" I asked. He looked at me tenderly. "Aren't you worth that effort?" That phrase pierced me. Yes, it was worth it. I was worth it. Weeks passed, the attacks stopped. Maybe they understood they could not continue. Maybe they were only waiting for the right moment for something worse. And it came. A messenger delivered a notice. Richard and Ivy. They were requesting court mediation. They claimed emotional abandonment, alienation of family assets, and financial imbalance. There was a scheduled date and attendance was mandatory. I remained strong. I arrived with the lawyer, armed with evidence, holding my head high. There, in front of the mediator, Ivy unleashed her venom. She is not well. She lives alone, far away in an isolated place. She cuts herself off and has no contact with her children. That is understandable. Richard said nothing, only kept his head down. I waited for my turn, and when it came, I spoke. For years, I lived in a home where I was invisible, where my meals were criticized, my opinions ignored, and my choices undermined. It was not just lack of love, it was disdain. I left because it was either that or perish slowly. The mediator listened quietly, took notes, and at the end said something unexpected. "Ladies and gentlemen, I find no legal grounds to proceed with any claim. Miss Celia is within her rights. Any further attempt at coercion might be regarded as harassment." Ivy turned red, while Richard did not raise his eyes. I left there feeling light in my soul, and when I got home, I hugged Mark the cat as if he were a living trophy. I had won not only the mediation, but my dignity back. However, what I did not yet realize was that Ivy's revenge was far from over. What followed was not simply cruel, it was monstrous. It did not take me even 2 days to regain some peace after the hearing, though I knew. Ivy was not the type to accept defeat without a response, so I wanted to believe that the firm ruling had made her step back. I deceived myself. I allowed myself to breathe, return to my routines, to the scent of morning coffee and the roosters crowing on the hill. Carmen visited me again, and Mark helped me sometimes with the chicken coop. The town no longer talked about me so much, and that was a blessing. However, this calm was only an illusion. One morning, the mail carrier handed me a large envelope with no sender. When I opened it, I found no words, only color photographs. The first pictures were of me at the market, in the square, and leaving the medical office where they had conducted mental evaluations. Then came photos of my house at night, taken from afar, and angles that made me shake. Someone was spying on me, watching every move, documenting my life. There was no written threat, but the message was clear. We are watching you. I felt the air leave me. I closed all doors and windows. I searched every corner of the house for cameras, microphones, anything. I found nothing, but fear settled in like a slow poison. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the rocking chair with a flashlight and my phone close by. I did not want to call anyone, not wanting to sound paranoid, but at dawn I called Mark. He arrived within minutes. I showed him the photographs. He did not say much, but his expression hardened. "This is not just intimidation," he muttered. "It is a message." Power and control. The worst part is they know the police will not lift a finger over some photos. We decided to install cameras ourselves, purchase motion sensor lights, and strengthen the locks. Richard even spoke to a neighbor who was a former military man to patrol the area at night. I felt like a prisoner inside my own sanctuary, but there was something else, a constant feeling that the real blow had not yet come. And I was right. One day at the market, I met a strange woman. She wore expensive but subdued clothing. Her look revealed a sense of superiority over everyone around. She approached me as if we already knew each other. "Mrs. Garcia, what a pleasure. I am Attorney Barrera. I represent a family foundation that works with elderly people. I have heard about you." I stared at her suspiciously. "Who told you about me?" She said a concerned woman mentioned I was alone, that my judgment might be declining, that I might need legal and medical support. She asked me to come and check personally. I felt my blood run cold. They did not say it outright, but it was clear. Ivy had hired someone to try to prove I was not mentally fit to live on my own. The woman continued talking, trying to extract information, asking about my routine, my income, my neighbors, and my activities. I asked her to leave. I did so politely but firmly, and as I walked away, I knew I had not scared her off. Her mission was much more than just a visit. It was deep, like a shadow, an intruder entering through invisible cracks. I returned home and called my lawyer, who advised me to document every single incident and file a preventive complaint. It was obvious they wanted to legally incapacitate me, to strip me of the right to decide and to be free. That very week, I received an official notice. A court had accepted to review a guardianship petition filed by Richard and Ivy. They claimed I suffered from paranoid delusions, extreme isolation, erratic behavior, and harmful financial decisions. They presented manipulated photos, conversations, and even false eyewitness statements from anonymous sources. I cried not out of fear, but out of anger and helplessness, because I knew my son, and I understood that to him I was no longer a mother, but an obstacle. It was Celia Garcia who encouraged me to fight back. She said, "You cannot give up. You already defeated them once. Don't let them take this away from you. If not for yourself, then do it for the women who look up to you as a role model." That is when I chose to retaliate. I gathered evidence, real testimonies, medical reports, and videos. I prepared a file with the lawyer, and most importantly, I recorded a statement. In front of the camera, I told the entire story, from my sacrifices as a mother to the humiliations I endured, what pushed me to leave, what made me resist, and what they were trying to do now. It was cathartic and also served as a warning. If they tried to publicly defame me, I would already have my version ready. The hearing took place in the state capitol. It was a lengthy and technical procedure, yet that initial session was crucial. It was there that the judge would determine whether there were grounds to proceed with the guardianship case. The day arrived. I dressed with the strength of someone who has been wounded but not defeated. I entered the courtroom with my heart pounding but with my head held high. Richard was there, Ivy too, standing beside him, along with a hired psychologist and attorney Barrera, an entire team ready to portray my life as a tale of madness. When they asked me to speak, I did not hesitate. My name is Celia Garcia. I am 72 years old. I have worked since I was 15. I raised my son alone for many years. I fed him, cared for him, educated him. I was insulted, ignored, used, and when I decided to live for myself, they called me crazy. I showed photographs, medical records, witness statements, and then shared something more. A video. It was a recording of Richard at our former home, laughing with Ivy and saying, "You will see. If my mother leaves, we will leave her alone there and then take everything from her. She is old. She will not defend herself." It hit like a bomb. The judge asked to pause the hearing and summoned the lawyers. Whispering and commotion filled the room before the judge issued a provisional ruling. The request for guardianship was denied due to insufficient evidence and possible legal manipulation with the aim of seizing assets. Ivy stood up enraged. Richard did not look at me. This time I cried, but not out of pain. I cried because finally justice had taken a step forward. For the first time, the truth had shielded me, and that made others believe in me. I left the courthouse uncertain about what would come next. Still, I felt something unfamiliar, a certainty, a seed sprouting within me. I had not come this far merely to survive. I was here to rebuild myself, and the way I would do it would astonish even them. After that court hearing, something deep inside me transformed forever. It was not just the satisfaction of winning. It felt like an invisible chain I had carried for decades was finally broken. I felt no fear, no shame, and for the first time in ages, no guilt for caring about myself. I experienced freedom, a kind that made my head spin because I had never truly owned it before. Returning home, my attitude was different. I stopped lowering my gaze. I walked proudly without glancing over my shoulder. Neighbors no longer saw me as poor Mrs. Celia, but as the woman who faced her own son and came out victorious. Some of the women in town sought my advice. Others embraced me silently. There was something in my eyes they recognized, maybe courage or exhaustion from pretending everything was fine. But I knew this piece was only a pause, not an end, because Ivy was not the type to back down. Richard was even less so. They did not know how to accept defeat, especially not against me. I waited anxiously for their next move, and it did not take long. One morning, I received a call from the bank. They informed me that there had been a suspicious transfer. It was stopped. Someone tried to move a large sum of money from one of my old accounts, the one that had been inactive ever since I sold everything and relocated. They asked me to come in person to clarify the situation, and when I arrived, I realized what was going on. Someone had forged my signature using a fake power of attorney. They used old documents mixing genuine papers with forgeries and nearly succeeded, but the bank grew suspicious due to a tiny detail. The accent of the person who called to authorize the transaction did not match mine. Yes, it was that clumsy, yet it served as a warning. Richard was desperate and willing to go to any lengths. I returned home with a firm decision. I would not wait for more attacks. I refused to live in constant defense. I was going to end this once and for all. To do that, I had to do something I had avoided for years. I had to share my truth not with a judge or a lawyer, but with everyone. I asked Carmen for help. She assisted me in creating a social media account. I asked Mark to lend me his phone that had a good camera. I sat by a window with just the right light and spoke. For over an hour, I shared my story with names, dates, and details, showing documents, photos, and evidence. But more than that, I spoke from the heart. I spoke as a wounded mother, as a humiliated woman, as a human being tired of staying silent. I said everything. How they used me. How they stripped me of everything. How they tried to make me seem insane. How they sought to destroy me, to leave me powerless just to keep my belongings. I shared how I ended up empty-handed, how I rebuilt my life with my own strength, and yet they still would not leave me alone. I named names and revealed faces, not to seek revenge, but to demand justice. We posted the video with no expectations, but on Petits Cienos, in less than a day, it went viral. Thousands of women commented, shared their stories, cried with me, and thanked me for speaking out when many dared not. Similar stories began to emerge like seeds carried by the wind. I was not alone. I never had been. And then the inevitable happened. A journalist reached out to me. Then another one followed, and a local television station came to interview me. Soon after, a national channel did the same. My story was everywhere, and the best part was they could no longer silence it because it was no longer only mine. Richard tried to deny everything. He claimed it was the fabrication of a sick mother, but people did not believe him. When a mother speaks from her soul, it shows. Then, like a wounded animal, he did something unthinkable. One night, without warning, he appeared at my house. I heard the pounding on the door, loud and violent as if he wanted to break it down. I looked through the window. It was him. He only screamed my name and said he wanted to talk. I did not open. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was fury and disappointment. It echoed all the times I had waited for him in vain as a child, all the times I stood up for him when no one else would. I picked up the phone and called the police. When they arrived, he had already left. But the following day, I received a letter. It had no sender's name, yet I recognized the handwriting. It was clumsy and uneven, as if penned in a fit of anger. If you refuse to stop, you will regret it. You will force me to do something I do not want to. You still have time to halt this. Erase everything. Silence yourself. This is your final warning. I stared at that sheet for hours. I felt no fear. I was certain about what I needed to do. I went straight to the prosecutor's office. I reported the attempt to falsify documents, the threats, the harassment, and handed over the letter as evidence. That same day, a formal investigation file was opened against Richard Garcia and Ivy on allegations of fraud, document forgery, attempted wrongful appropriation, and aggravated threats. That was the moment they finally stopped hiding, because the mask had fallen, and when masks fall, the real ending begins. After submitting the letter to the prosecutor's office, I felt something inside me had sealed shut. There was no turning back. The words had been spoken, the evidence presented, the story revealed. Whatever came next would come. But for the first time, it was not me who needed to hide. It was them, Richard and Ivy, who thrived on others' silence, but now were under scrutiny and could not stand the light. Social networks were relentless. More and more women shared their own stories of abandonment, contempt, and manipulation of children who once were sweet and then, without knowing how, they became tormentors of their own mothers. It was not merely my story, it was that of thousands, millions. I had given the voice, but the resonance was shared by many. The prosecution moved forward with a speed that even I had not anticipated. The viral video helped, but what truly accelerated the process was something I failed to foresee. A former employee of Richard came forward voluntarily to testify. Her name was Maricela, and she had worked as his administrative assistant for 2 years. She kept copies of emails, contracts, and most importantly, audio recordings where Ivy could be heard discussing how to transfer the documents without the old woman noticing, her voice revealing disdain, her scheme unfolding. When I first listened to those recordings, I felt nauseous. It was as if a blindfold suddenly dropped away. I had always suspected Ivy was the cold and calculating mind, but hearing her mocking tone, the way she spoke about me as if I were a burden, an obstacle, shattered me into pieces. That woman had slept under my roof, eaten my food, used my blankets, celebrated my birthdays only to laugh behind my back. After me, the case grew like wildfire. The press called it the betrayal of the son of the town, because Richard had given interviews before, presenting himself as a successful businessman, a family man, and a local benefactor. But now everything was falling apart. The carefully built image began to reveal cracks neither he nor his team could conceal. 1. One day before the precautionary measure was issued to freeze their assets, Richard and Ivy vanished without warning, without farewell, leaving no trace behind. It was only known that they had emptied a secondary bank account, rented a car using borrowed documents, and then disappeared. Some rumors claimed they had crossed into Guatemala. Others suggested that Ivy had family in Texas. We were not entirely sure, but something deep inside told me they were not as far away as we thought. I did not celebrate. I did not dance. I did not feel victorious. I felt emptiness. Because a mother does not win when her child falls, she only survives the blow. I sought refuge in routine. I continued attending my sessions with Carmen, the psychologist. She helped me realize that love often does not break suddenly, but rather through small daily cuts, like paper tearing skin. It was not my fault. Being a mother does not mean being a martyr. Saying enough is also a way to love oneself. One afternoon, while watering the plants in the yard, a truck parked in front of my house. 2 men got out. They were not dressed like police officers, but something in their stance put me on alert. They knocked on the door. "Mrs. Celia Garcia," one of them asked in a formal but tense tone. I nodded. "We are from the public ministry. We have an order to inspect this property. We received an anonymous report that the accused might have returned and are hiding." I froze. "Here?" I asked, confused. "Is there anyone else living with you?" they inquired. I denied it. They entered and searched every corner, even the chicken coop. They found nothing, yet the message was unmistakable. Someone was playing dirty, once again. Someone intended to make it look like I was covering for them. That person had a name and a surname and knew exactly how to intimidate me without revealing themselves. That night, I could not sleep. I thought about booking a flight, leaving everything behind, changing my identity, and starting fresh in another country. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, I did not see the broken woman I once was, but a new version, one who had faced contempt, judgment, and abandonment, and was still standing tall. So I did the only thing I could do. I defended myself, started recording again, and spoke out louder than before. I explained what happened, showed the inspection order, declared my innocence, and most importantly, openly challenged those who were hunting me. I said that if they had something to say, they should come forward. They should not hide behind threats or false accusations. I was no longer afraid and had no intention of going anywhere. That video became the most viewed of all. It reached over 3 million views within 2 days. The support was overwhelming. Journalists, lawyers, activists, even actresses spoke out in my favor. They invited me on programs, offered legal representation, and defended me publicly. A senator even called me to include my testimony in a bill addressing patrimonial violence. Then something unexpected happened. A woman appeared at my door, her hair tied back, her face marked by years, and her gaze steady. She spoke her name softly. "I am Azucena, Ivy's mother." I was left speechless. She looked at me with sorrow. "I am not here to justify her actions. I came to ask for your forgiveness, not for her, but for myself, because I too remained silent. I suffered quietly. I was also humiliated by the daughter I raised. I believed it was my fault until I saw your story and realized that some children get lost, not because of our lack of love, but due to their overwhelming selfishness. We hugged, we cried, and that night I slept better, knowing that although pain does not vanish, it changes form, and the truth, painful as it is, also brings freedom. Yet the worst was still to come. A call in the middle of the night with a male voice saying, "Mrs. Celia Garcia, we found them." My heart stopped. Where? At a hostel near the border, Richard tried to escape through the roof, and Vanas locked herself in the bathroom. They are in custody now, but we need you to come identify key documents we found with them. They belong to you. My body shook. It was either the end or just the beginning. I prepared myself without a word. It was not fear, but a heavy, deep feeling in my chest. Impossible to tell if it was sadness, anger, or a mix of both. I took a taxi. The ride to the small town where they were kept was long and silent, my gaze lost among windows, trees, and distant houses. Everything felt detached, like watching a movie from outside. But this was no film. It was my story, and I had reached the last stop. Upon arriving, some people escorted me to a waiting room. I could not see them just yet, but I already knew they were there only meters away, breathing the same air as I was. After months of hiding, manipulating, and running, they were finally caught. The prosecutor explained that they had discovered original documents of my properties, altered records, accounts with illegal transfers, and even a diary containing personal notes from Ivy, where she referred to me as the old witch who still refuses to die. Their hatred was there, written down as evidence. "We need you to confirm if these papers belong to you," he said, handing me a folder. I recognized my forged signature, the manipulated seal from my notary office, and even a deed that claimed I had donated the house to them out of will and eternal gratitude. I felt nauseous. "Yes, all that was mine or had been mine," I said firmly. Then the prosecutor asked me something unexpected. "Mrs. Celia, would you like to see them?" My body tensed. What would I gain from that? Maybe nothing, or perhaps closure. We leave that to your judgment. I took a deep breath and agreed. They led me down a narrow hallway to a door at the end with a small window. I peered through, and there they were. Richard, my son, was sitting down, his head bowed, clothes wrinkled, face exhausted, and beard unkempt. He was not the same person, or maybe he was, but now without the mask. Ivy, on the other hand, held her gaze steadily. Even behind the glass, her arrogance was palpable. She showed no remorse, only contempt, as if all of this disgusted him, as if I owed him anything even in that place. I did not go in. I just watched them. They saw me. Richard stood up unsteadily and came closer to the glass. His lips moved. He said something. I did not hear it, but I read it clearly. "Sorry, Mom." At that moment, I understood that forgiveness is not a coin handed out like charity. It is a choice. And I, after everything I had been through, was not compelled to accept it. I turned around and left, not out of bitterness, but out of dignity. I let justice take its course. Ivy was charged with fraud, falsification of documents, and illicit enrichment. Richard faced similar accusations, but with added severity for taking advantage of his mother's situation. They tried to negotiate, ask for house arrest, claim depression, but the public prosecutor's office did not give in. Public opinion was watching closely. There was pressure. The trial became a media event. I was offered exclusive interviews, to write a book, to share my story on national television. I declined everything except for one thing, a forum organized by a network of older women. They invited me to speak, to share, so I went in front of more than 200 women with similar experiences. Some cried, others nodded, all listened attentively. I spoke from the heart. We were not born to be eternal servants. We are not responsible for the ingratitude of those we raised with love. It is not our duty to remain silent or endure. It is our right to live in peace. When they asked me, "If you leave, will you do me a favor?" I replied, "Yes, but first I am doing it for myself." Applause and tears followed. Some came closer to me afterward. "I also have a son who treats me badly," one woman told me. "My daughter-in-law took everything from me," another confessed. "Thank you for speaking out. You gave us strength." I was never a hero, just a woman tired of staying silent. I returned home with a lighter heart. The previous silence had been replaced by a new peace, one that depended on no one and belonged entirely to me. That was when I made a decision. I painted the house and opened a small sewing workshop in the garage, not for money, but for pleasure. I taught neighbors, neighborhood girls, women eager to learn something new. We laughed, chatted, and supported one another. One afternoon, a young woman knocked on the door and asked, "Are you the lady from the video?" I nodded. "My grandmother says thanks to you, she dared to stand up to her children." She handed me a hand-knitted scarf with a note saying, "Thank you for refusing to stay silent. I treasure it." Months passed, and the trial ended. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in prison and Ivy to 10. They appealed and lost. No one cried for them or waited for them. I never visited nor answered their letters because sometimes loving also means letting go. Today I walk through the square without hiding. People greet me, some call me brave, others just smile. Each night I look in the mirror and say, yes, I left. And it was the best favor I could ever do for myself. Sometimes life places before us a reflection we never asked for, a mirror that does not show wrinkles or scars, but choices instead. Time does not always heal. At times it unveils the truth. When reality appears raw, without embellishment or excuses, we are left with only one option: to continue as we once were or to dare to become who we can still be. This is not about revenge, nor pride, and definitely not about ego. It is about respect, about looking back without lowering our gaze and facing forward without fear. There are battles we never chose, yet we decide how they conclude. Strength is not innate. It is forged the moment we stop asking permission to live peacefully. From that moment on, life ceases to be what others imposed upon us and becomes what we decide to build from what remains. There is no age restriction for new beginnings, only the courage to take the first step. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing ourselves. The end.